This video is primarily meant for the ones who never served and you're starting units right now. And the people you have in your unit, the people you're recruiting, have no military experience. You really starting from scratch. Now, I'm going to be building off of or adding more info to the first section in a video I did recently, Militia is what you should be doing right now. And that's obviously units. I want to cover areas such as size and type, dispersion, areas of operation, and we'll throw in there communications and interoperability between units. A lot of this stuff you can research more by looking at past videos I've done. Now, for units, if you're wondering how you should organize, what's a starting point, the type of thing you should be shooting for, I did a lot of videos in the past on militia unit organizations. Those are still uploaded on YouTube. You can find them there under the playlists. They're also uploaded over on BitChute. You can find them there. I go in there from buddy teams all the way up to potentially battalion and regiment brigade size formations and cover things like heavy weapons teams and all kinds of stuff. Now, I mentioned in the last video, your units should be small and independent, max of a platoon in size. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have a company-sized organization. Company is 2 platoons or larger. If you're wondering size of platoon, figure 2 dozen to maybe 40 to 50 if you're going real heavy. So if you're part of a company organization, do not come together all elements of that company in one location at one time unless you're about to perform a mission. Keep your people dispersed. That way you're harder to find, and if the enemy finds you, drops artillery on you, drops an airstrike on your head, you don't lose the entire unit in that one location. You only lose a piece of it. Now, examples of categories of units I gave you. Light infantry, which is the basic unit. This is going to be a unit that doesn't have a lot of experience in anything specialized. You're just doing your basic guerrilla operations. Hit and runs, ambushes, booby traps in front of the enemy when they're moving through an area, taking pot shots at them with snipers, rockets, mortars, that type of thing. Now, you also have in there horse cavalry, which I brought up. It's going to be kind of rare. There aren't as many horses as there used to be, but I think there'll be some units that'll stand up on that. And also motorized or wheeled units, and that's something I want to flesh out a little bit more in this, and who knows, maybe I'll end up doing its own separate video as a unit organization sometime. Now, we had a thing in the military. We used to say everything was METTC dependent. METTC is an acronym. METTTC. Mission, enemy, time, terrain, troops available, and civilian considerations. And that does come into play pretty heavily when you're setting up your unit. What is the terrain you are going to be operating in inside your anticipated area of operations? Not your actual area of operations, your anticipated. What's the size of the area you anticipate you're going to be moving around in and doing operations in? A unit inside the city will be cellular. It'll be different than a unit that you'll find up in the mountains or up in the hills. And the unit that's up in here will be different than a unit that's operating primarily in farmland. A unit that's in farmland will probably be different than a unit that's operating in the forests. heavily wooded areas. Now you have to consider inside your anticipated AO, what's the likely threats? Who and what are you likely to face? Also, what's the anticipated missions you think you're going to be doing? Are you going to be just doing basic hit and run guerrilla ambush stuff? Are you going to be taking out enemy checkpoints on roadways? Are you going to be ambushing larger enemy convoys, larger enemy units, potentially going, toe to toe with them? Are you going to be launching raids against combat outposts, raids and attacks against forward operating bases, main operating bases, or fire bases? Also, you need to take into consideration what is realistically your capabilities. What are the skills and experiences of the people that you have? What can they realistically do? And what is your finance situation? Each person. If your unit is full of people who live paycheck to paycheck, you're probably not going to be able to afford, a Cuck V, an M4 Sherman tank. Hell, you may not be able to afford a rusted out Chevy Suburban as a vehicle for your unit either. You're more than likely going to be light infantry, where everything you have, you carry with you on your back, or you carry with you on some type of cart or smaller means of logistical transportation. Now, skills and experience, it can vary widely, even amongst veterans. You may have someone who is in two people that were in the National Guard. One of them may have been in during the era when all they did was show up to drill each month, drink beer, and sit around. When they went to the field, all they did is barbecue. I've met National Guardsmen like that. I've also met National Guardsmen that when they were in, they did combat tours overseas. So you're going to have completely different experience sets and potentially skill sets between the two. The one that went overseas might have learned their mission, their job, a little bit more thoroughly than the one who was sitting here in the States during his entire time in. Now, even the ones that went overseas, you can have vastly different experiences. You could have a person who spent their entire tour sitting on a base camp pushing papers. The only time they left that gate, they left that base, was when they rotated back to the States. That person will have completely different skill set and experience than the person who was out doing convoy security for a year, or someone who was running route clearance, looking for IEDs for a year, or clearing minefields for a year, or was handling prisoners inside a detention facility. Look at your people, evaluate their skills, see what you need to accomplish the particular missions you anticipate you're going to be dealing with. Now, you also need to look at what's the support you have. What can you get a hold of logistically? If you have more better financial backing for your people, you can get more items to stockpile and pre-locate in the field inside your AO to help you out during operations. If you guys are paycheck to paycheck, your logistics footprint might be what you can carry inside your rucksack, and that's all you can afford. And then you better be thinking about hunting and foraging as much as possible to supplement what little you will get off your enemy. You also need to take into account what is the support, the feelings of the people in your area. Most likely the ones inside larger cities they're going to be leaning towards your globalist, your socialist, communist type of mentality compared to someone who's out in the country who might be more patriotic, more traditional American. If the area you're in leans more towards the enemy, it's going to be harder for you to hide. It's going to be harder for you to hide anything larger than a person and what they can carry on them. So units that are in areas that have considerable support for the enemy, for the most part, are going to be light infantry, because it's easier to hide light infantry than it is to hide a half dozen trucks that are camouflaged and travel in convoys, moving from place to place, and enemy personnel and sympathizers in those locations that they arrive at have a tendency to become organic compost. Now, first I'm going to jump into urban areas. I'll make this note here on my little state map I went through. I divided it up into different AOs for different units. Even in a city here, it's divided up. So primarily we have two different organizations operating inside this city with this major river as their boundary between the two. Now, urban units, you probably want to think more of cellular structure, along the lines of what the Irish Republican Army did, along the lines of what you see in resistance movements in World War II. Don't copy what the IRA did completely, especially from the 1960s onward, because around the 1960s, the IRA was heavily infiltrated by British intelligence, and definitely by the 1980s, the IRA, the provisional IRA, was basically being run by the British government. Whenever they got into trouble, hey, let's get the IRA cell to set off a bomb somewhere and draw attention away from the current scandal. Now, cells inside the city, I think mostly should be around squad size. So 10 to maybe 15 personnel max. And your cell should be divided up into teams. A good way, or good example to use for this is basically the Iraqi IED cell. You had different teams inside that cell, and each team did not necessarily know who else was in that cell on that other team. Your bomb-making team probably didn't know who all was in the reconnaissance and IED placement team, and they wouldn't know who's on your ambush team, who's the trigger man, who's the security, who's your little assault element. Each team was isolated from knowing who else was inside their cell, they're inside their group. Now, types of teams I could see inside an urban environment include security and assault. These are your direct action people. They will provide security whenever the group is in a particular location, wherever your assets are at, wherever you're hiding your weapons, demolitions, and supplies. You would also have your reconnaissance and observation teams. These are the ones that are getting the information on the enemy so that you can conduct operations. Another team that I could see is your logistics and fabrication teams. Your logistics and fabrication teams would be the ones that will get you what you need to conduct operations. It can be from stealing it from the enemy, buying it from the enemy, buying it off the black market, or it could be manufacturing it or modifying something. These are the guys that would be making the IEDs. These are the ones that would be making weapons, repairing weapons. These would be the ones that would go through and do maintenance on vehicles and modifying vehicles as needed for a mission. You're more likely to see wheeled units inside a city than out in the country. Now, you're also going to have your medical teams, potentially field hospitals hidden inside the city somewhere. where when someone gets injured in a particular cell, they know, hey, we got to take them to this location, and then they'll go into a medical process. They'll get picked up, transported to another location, where they get operated on, transported to a different location where they'll receive care until they heal up. And then potentially you'll have IED only teams where their job is to do IED operations, mining operations, booby trap operations on the enemy. Now, types of vehicles I could see being employed. For your reconnaissance element, cars, delivery vehicles, motorcycles, and bikes. You're going to want to be able to move around in your vehicle or inside your AO without being noticed. You could potentially also see employed in your reconnaissance cells bus drivers, taxi drivers, your Lyft and Uber type drivers, because they're going to be moving all through your AO and they can keep watch as to what the hell the enemy's doing. And I hate saying this, but you see this a lot. Kids. Kids get used a lot by urban guerrillas because they can be somewhere, tossing a ball against the wall, keeping watch on what the enemy's doing. Or sitting on a stoop, whatever, monitoring the enemy. Now for your operations cells, your assault teams, your ambush teams and that stuff, types of vehicles I could see them using are cars. If it's a snatch and grab, you're probably going to see a smaller vehicle, quick in, quick out. SUVs, cargo vans, delivery vehicles, and motorcycles. Motorcycles have the capability of moving around in a city easier because they can fit into areas larger vehicles can't. They can go around those accidents. They can go down narrow alleys. Now, when you're planning, and this will go for urban and rural, when you're planning what type of vehicles you should try to get for your unit, you should have on hand. There's some ways you can find out that information. You can contact your state DMV, your local license bureaus, and just plain ask them. Back during the Cold War, they had to keep track of what was the most common vehicles in a particular area for the state and particular regions of the state, particular cities. During the Cold War, survivalists would contact them, ask for that information, and then they would use that for consideration of the vehicles they would get a hold of. The reason for that, something goes wrong, end of the world happens, fuel dries up and so forth, people aren't driving anymore, but you still are. Well, those other vehicles that aren't moving around, that are abandoned, maybe sitting inside the local junkyard, those are a source of parts for you. And if you do that, please only take them from the enemy. Take those parts from collaborators, sympathizers, or that enemy colonel who has his vehicle parked in front of his house and you need a new alternator that happens to be the same size that's inside his vehicle. Contact your DMV, contact your license bureau, and have a believable story. Something along the lines of, say you got a kid in school, has to do a report. Subject to the report the kid has to is what is the common vehicles inside the state or inside that area. And not just, well, it's car, it's pickup, it's SUV. The specific models. The make and the model. Now you could also call and say that you and a friend are going to start up a mechanics shop. And you want to have an idea of what type of vehicles are most common in your area so that you can have the correct diagnostic equipment or the correct spare parts on hand that are going to be a high volume, they're going to be moving a lot quicker so that you can get vehicles repaired and out the door faster. And then the last option that you could do is just plain old observation. Looking at the vehicles in your area inside your anticipated AO, whether it's that section of the city or that area out in the country. What's the most common? And as I said, you want make and model. You know, is it a Chevy Suburban? Or is it a Ford Explorer or a Jeep Cherokee? Or a Subaru of Outback or whatever? What type of pickup truck? You know, is it a Ford F-150 or is it a Dodge Ram? Or a Chevy 2500? You want to get as specific as possible so that you have easy crossover for parts that are available inside your AO. You're still going to want to have stockpiles of parts, but there's going to be some items that you're not going to be able to stockpile, like new transmissions, new engines, bigger, heavier things. That's where it comes into being able to get it off another vehicle inside your AO. Now, a mandatory thing that I could think of for rural units, face masks will be mandatory during all operations because there is cameras freaking everywhere in cities, and it doesn't matter how small that city is. And another thing you should be doing, gloves. Wear gloves. There's a thing called fingerprints. If you get chased out of a safe house, chased out of a warehouse or whatever, they'll go through, they will fingerprint the hell out of the area, and they'll start tracking down everyone that they can identify the prints on. So cut down on the enemy's capabilities on that. Now we'll go into the rural units outside the major cities. As I said before, the basic unit will be light infantry. They're the ones that will be doing most of the direct actions with the enemy. Now I did bring up you're going to have local units and main force units. Your local units, like I said, for the most part are going to be basic infantry, light infantry, motorized infantry. Main force units are primarily going to be specialized units. Like I said, sappers, indirect fire units that are a little bit heavier caliber than what you can carry with you. I'm just going back in my notes, see if I can find also light armor. And as I said before, the light armor, it can be stuff you get now, or it can be stuff you can take off your enemy. Light armor, you're talking MRAPs, you're talking gun trucks, you're talking armored personnel carriers, infantry fighting vehicles, maybe light tanks. So you don't want a main battle tank like a T-72, Challenger 2, you know, an Abrams. You're talking lighter stuff. Old school stuff like your PT-76s from Russia and that stuff. Also maybe, you know, your M3s, M5s, which, you know, have fun trying to find the 37mm ammunition for them. Lighter tanks, lighter vehicles that can get around easier, don't require as much maintenance as the heavy vehicles. Now, I will make this note here. I know there are people that watch my videos and figure that's going to be good enough. You're going to become an engineer unit just going off of what I've taught you. My guidance, my recommendation is, unless you have someone who is trained and experienced in the use and safe handling of explosives, don't mess with them. If the only experience, only knowledge you have on explosives is what you can find on the internet, especially sources like the Anarchist Cookbook, don't mess with them. You're going to get hurt. You're going to screw something up. The Anarchist Cookbook, the only version of that has real information, that's usable information, is the very first run of the very first edition. And you're not going to find those. Any edition you find online, PDF, e-file, whatever, it's going to be tampered with. You try doing any of the recipes, any of the things inside the Anarchist Cookbook, you're going to lose a hand, you're going to lose your eyesight, and will probably lose your life. Don't use that as a source. Military manuals, there's good ones online. You know, just be careful. But really, my recommendation is do not mess with explosives unless you have someone who has experience with them, who is trained in them. I will toss this out there for law enforcement and the people that monitor the channel. My historic ordnance videos, there's always one or two things I do not mention when I do those videos that will prevent you from actually doing those examples. Someone who is trained in explosives will figure out what got left out. Someone not trained in explosives won't figure it out. Now, the exceptions on these would be hand grenades and directional mines, like your Claymores, your Mon 50s, and that stuff around the world. Pre-manufactured, those were made for the lowest common denominator, if you want to think of that, for your light infantry to be able to figure out and how to use quickly and easily. And the information on that stuff, it's been out there for a long time. That you can, for the most part, rely on, if you find it online. Now, for recommendations for motorized and wheeled units out in the rural areas, it's going to be pretty obvious. For your direct action elements, SUVs, pickups, and lighter trucks, your farm trucks. Probably not your semis. You know, there may come a time when you'll be able to slip one into a mission somehow, but it's not going to be something you're going to be hauling around with you all the time. And keep the size of your convoys small when you're moving through your AO. Probably a max of 2 to 3 vehicles together at a time. Space out your convoys. You got some distance between each little group, so that if a group runs into an ambush, you don't lose the entire unit in one shot. Now, scouts and messengers, light as possible. Think of dirt bikes, motorcycles, that type of thing. And you could throw in there bikes also. Now, with bicycles, as I said, this was brought up by Uman from our syndicate. There were bicycle infantry units in the beginning of World War II. How they basically operated is they used the bike to get to the area for an operation, dismounted, and then went in as light infantry. The amount of supplies they had with them at any given time is what they carried on their back or in bags attached to the bikes. There are bicycle wagons and that type of stuff, bicycle stroller type things that people will haul kids in. You could use something like that to carry around additional supplies with you if you go the bicycle-borne route for your unit. Now, it was brought up the Viet Cong during the Vietnam War, 1960s, 1970s. They employed bicycles completely different than the way they were employed in World War II. Now, the Viet Cong and the NVA modified bikes heavily. Modifications I'm aware of on bikes, and there's still more information I want to get because I still want to go through, modify a bicycle and show it for video. I know on the handlebars they would attach a piece of bamboo or a branch from a tree so that the gorilla could stand alongside with one hand, move the bike down the trail. They would remove the seats from the bikes. I don't know if they removed the chains or the pedals or both. I do know that they had a cargo type system that would be strapped over the top of the bike so that they could carry many hundreds of pounds worth of ammunition and food down the trail, and weapons. Always take into account the terrain inside your area. That'll determine, which route you should go. Units out here would be more likely to be more motorized than a unit up in the hills. Unit up in the hills, you could see your horse-borne cavalry, maybe bicycle units on mountain bikes with your fat boy tires and that stuff. Just be real careful with your supply bikes when you're going downhill. You might have to have 2 people on that bike to keep it from flying downhill with all your ammo on it. But you could see up in mountains your dirt bikes and that type of stuff, your lighter motorcycles. Now, we're going to be going into dispersion, areas of operation, main force, and local. All this is going to kind of blend together here. I've gone through on the map, divided it up into different areas for different units. Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, out in the rural. And there's areas in here where there are no units. That's going to happen. You're going to have areas where there is no Patriot or militia unit in there. Those areas are basically open. If the time comes around, you hear a lot of stuff's going on into that area. If you can move into that area to try to counter some of that enemy activity, go for it. Now, as I said, dispersion. If you're a company size unit, no more than a platoon together at any given time, spread them out inside your AO. So let's say we have a company size unit operating up in here. Well, they may have one platoon is operating over here to ambush along this road. Another platoon is operating up in here, covering this area. And let's say they got another platoon, their headquarters element and that stuff. Let's say they're operating up here in the foothills for right now. Each element, no more than platoon in size. Even your patrol bases and base camps, try to spread them out, lessen the chance of losing large numbers of people from a single hit from an artillery or mortar or from an airstrike. But don't spread yourself out so much that you can get easily cut off from each other and wiped out when you're in base camps and that stuff. When you're operating separately as a platoon, for the most part, you're pretty much on your own. Now, AOs will come into effect really big when you look at main force and local. Local units, you're just operating in one small area. Let's say this Alpha unit here, they're operating in 1 or 2 counties right in here. They're a smaller unit. Let's say they're platoon size. Over here, we got Bravo Militia. They're larger. They got a couple platoons. They're operating in 3 to 4 counties. Now they're overlapping some of Alpha's AO. Nothing wrong with that. You can have more than one unit covering a particular area. You'll be hitting the enemy more and you'll be driving them nuts as they try to figure out who hit them. Which group was it? Which direction did they go? That type of thing. Now, local units, you're going to stay local just in your area. You may go outside your AO once in a while for a particular mission or because something gets too hot inside your immediate AO and you need to move somewhere where there's less pressure so you can regroup, recoup, take care of your wounded, re-equip. Main force units are going to be specialized units. They're going to cover approximately 25% to 50% of a state for most parts of the U.S. It's really going to be, how large the state is. A main force unit in Delaware can cover an entire state, where a main force unit in Texas is probably only going to cover maybe 10%. Right now, if you look at this, Delta could be considered a main force unit because they have about 25% of the state. But if Delta is just infantry, or their unit just operates only inside here, And they, you know, really concentrate where they operate. They're only doing ambushes on these roads in here, primarily these. They could probably be classified as a local unit. Main force unit, well, one week they can be up here. The next week they can be down over here. Next week they could be up over here. Week after that they could be back over here. Week after that they could be down in here. They're moving around wherever they're needed, wherever their particular skill set is needed, especially, like I said, sappers. Now, we'll throw a little mission in here, give you an idea on interoperability, main force, local units, how this stuff could work together. Let's say we got an air base right in here. The enemy's occupied it. They've located helicopter gunships and transports in there, and they also have light infantry battalion in there. They're operating all in here, and they're causing people tons of trouble. It's inside Alpha's AO. It's their primary responsibility, but it's a bigger target than they can handle. But it's affecting everyone else. So maybe Alpha comes up with an idea. What if we do a raid against that base, try to destroy as many helicopters as we can, and also go through, destroy their fuel stockpiles and their ammunition stockpiles. Try to take out as many pilots and the ground crew as we can. So, contact Bravo, see if they're interested in the operation. Contact Charlie, they're nearby also. They would be able to move into the area quickly to support that type of operation. They may not go in there en masse, the entire unit. They may only send in a squad. They may send in a platoon. Who knows? Now, when we're talking to Bravo over here, we find out that a main force indirect fire unit came down out of the hills and is operating in this area right now. They're resupplying. Bravo was able to hit a convoy, and they captured a bunch of 81mm mortar ammo that they can't use because they don't have 81mm mortars. Well, that indirect fire unit does. They get asked if they'd be able to support the operation also, if they'd be willing to. Yeah, let's go ahead. When they're talking to Charlie, maybe they find out, hey, we got a main force sapper unit that moved into the state here from the next state over. They have contact with them because they're up here resting, re-equipping. They're doing small operations up in here. They contact those sappers, find out if they'd be willing to get involved. Yes, they would. So now you have a means that you can get into the perimeter. The different planning elements from each of these groups gets together and they start doing some basic plans on the operation. When should it be conducted? How should it be conducted? What should each unit do? What's each unit's capabilities? We come up with a plan. Charlie, when they move in, they'll come in from the north side of the base. Alpha, they're going to come in from the west side. Bravo, they're going to swing in through here, and they're going to come in from the south side. The indirect fire unit, well, they'll set up because they're going to be our little cover when we're at the end of the operation, when we do the disengagement signal. Main force unit comes down, they split up, go to where they need to support each element. Now the sappers, they put in breaches on the wire, covert breaches. Then the light infantry from these three units, Charlie, Alpha, and Bravo, start going through the wire. That light infantry then starts going after the ground crew. They start going after the security. They try drawing away the security elements inside that base, while the sappers go from the covert breach into planting charges on those helicopters, into planting charges on that ammo dump where they have the rockets and the ammunition for the choppers. They start planting charges on the fuel supplies inside that base. And then on signal, everyone pulls out. And then the indirect fire units starts dropping rounds on the enemy base also. They start putting the mortars in there, whether it's 60 millimeters used by these units, 81 millimeters, whatever the indirect has. They start putting it in there to cover the withdrawal and the sounds of the explosions going off. Now, who would be in overall command of that operation? Alpha. It's inside their primary AO. If it's here where you got overlap, or potentially here where it's overlap, whoever came up with the idea should be the overall yay or nay on the stuff. Unless you got someone who's just head and shoulders above everyone else, tactical planning wise and that type of stuff, then really that person should be in charge. But it's going to be a situation where everyone has to agree on it. Don't get into dick measuring contests. You get into that type of thing, people are just going to get killed, plain and simple. Now, communications, I know I've mentioned this before, done videos on it. You should have communications with the units around you for emergencies if you need support, and also a situation like this where you want to bring people together to attack a target. You have to have a way to contact Charlie unit and Bravo unit down here. And like I said, interoperability. Train with these other units now if possible. Once you actually, the conflict's going on, try setting up some operations with them, especially in areas where you overlap. Let's say down in here where we overlap, we get word from spies up in here that there's going to be a large supply convoy coming into the city on this ASR, hitting this MSR, and coming in from the south. Well, that convoy is going to be too well protected, too large for each individual unit to take care of on its own. So what if we come up with an idea of putting in a series of ambushes? Well, Bravo will get in charge of a set of ambushes here. Alpha will get in charge of a set of ambushes here. Hit your target, get your end result. Covered pretty much all of the notes that I have for units. Look at history. You know, there are tons of examples on specialized units and basic units out there, and different concepts and ideas that weren't even put into action, or potentially a concept that was a failure when it was done originally, but maybe we can adapt it and make it a success in our particular situation. Always adapt. Your enemy's always going to adapt to what you do, so you need to adapt to counter that. You're going to change the composition of your unit. You're going to change the size of your unit. You're going to grow larger, you're going to grow smaller. You recruit more people, you're going to add more squads, more teams, maybe make your individual squads larger. You have too many casualties, you're going to downsize. Maybe you're going to have to go from 3 platoons down to 2 platoons so that you have 2 platoons that are close to fully manned instead of having 3 very understrength platoons. Adjust according to the situation. Look at what's been done in the past. Modify it to fit your needs. Hopefully that gets you some ideas, gets you thinking more on how some of this stuff kind of works, and it will help you out. Now, for all my engineer brothers in the Patriot Militia movement, always remember, essayons.